The Sicilian Vow, a threat in the night.
Detective Mori.
The woman's voice was taut, as if stretched too thin over a hidden fear.
I need your help. Someone is watching me.
I had been enjoying a glass of Grillo, savoring the silence of my Palermo apartment. But the urgency in her voice pulled me into the night. Valeria La Rocca, a name that carried weight along the Sicilian coast. Heiress to a shipping empire, patron of the arts, and owner of one of the most opulent villas overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. People like her didn't call people like me unless the situation was beyond the reach of polite society. 15 minutes later, my car rolled to the iron gates of Villa La Rocca, its sprawling terraces gleaming under the moonlight. The house was a fortress in disguise, ornate, elegant, but designed to keep people out, or in. Valeria met me at the grand entrance, her silk robe cinched tightly around her frame. Her dark eyes darted past me into the night, searching for shadows.
I found something.
She whispered it as she led me inside. The villa's interior was a museum of old money. Frescoes framed in gold leaf, crystal chandeliers that bathed everything in warm amber light. But the scene in the study was out of place. A shattered porcelain heirloom, a Majolica vase, centuries old, lay in shards across the marble floor. But my attention was on the note pinned beneath one of the larger fragments. Handwritten, a single sentence in Sicilian dialect. "O giuramento non si scorda." The vow is never forgotten. I didn't need a translation. I'd heard the phrase before, spoken in hushed voices by men who treated blood ties like scripture, a relic of the old world, of ancient pacts made in the darkness. Valeria was watching me closely. It wasn't a question. I crouched, lifting the note carefully. "Where did you find this?"
It wasn't here when I went to bed. The vase was still on the shelf.
She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill that had nothing to do with the coastal breeze.
Someone was inside my house, detective, and they wanted me to see this.
I studied the broken vase. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing else was touched, no drawers rifled through, no valuables taken. Whoever had done this wasn't after money. They were sending a message. I turned the note over. Nothing on the back. No signature. Just those 6 words, pressing against something buried deep in my past. I had spent years carving out a reputation as a detective, as a man who stood apart from a name he'd carried. But even in the dim light of the villa, I could feel the weight of Francesco Mori. The way people hesitated when they heard it. And now, a wealthy woman from Palermo's elite was being stalked, and the threat had ties to a past I wanted nothing to do with. "You need to stay somewhere else tonight." I rose to my feet. Valeria hesitated, then nodded.
I'll go to my sister's place in Catania.
"Good. I'll look into this. And I'll need to know everything. Anyone who might have a reason to threaten you." She met my gaze, something unreadable flickering in her expression.
This isn't just about me, is it?
I exhaled. "No, I don't think it is." Because whoever left that note wasn't just haunting her. They were calling me back into the shadows. And I wasn't sure I could afford to answer. Secrets and seduction. By morning, Villa La Rocca was empty. Valeria had left before dawn, and I stood alone in her study, staring at the shattered remains of the Majolica vase. Whoever had been inside last night hadn't needed to break in. There were no forced locks, no shattered windows. They had a way in. I pulled on gloves and carefully collected the note again. The ink had bled slightly, the Sicilian dialect rough but deliberate. "O giuramento non si scorda." The vow is never forgotten. An ancient vow, one that tied back to my past, whether I liked it or not. But if I wanted answers, I needed to trace the message, not the messenger. The phrase wasn't just a warning. It was a clue. And in Sicily, history is never just history. It's currency. The Museum of Sicilian Antiquities, Palermo. It wasn't the kind of place I usually found myself. My cases tended to take me through the back alleys and underbellies of the city, not the hallowed halls of academia. But if this note was connected to something older than both Valeria and me, I needed an expert. And that's how I found Dr. Isabella Moretti. She was standing at the center of a dimly lit archive room, flipping through delicate parchment with the kind of reverence most people reserve for prayer.
Francesco Mori.
She said my name without turning around. I raised an eyebrow. You know me?
Your reputation precedes you.
She finally looked up. Her eyes were the color of dark honey, sharp enough to cut through stone.
People like you don't usually care much for history.
I care when it comes knocking on my door. I pulled out the note and placed it on the table between us. This phrase, "Have you seen it before?" She studied it, her fingers tracing the ink lightly.
Yes.
Her voice was barely above a whisper.
It appears in old Sicilian blood oaths, particularly among noble families who made, let's say, unofficial agreements.
You mean the Mafia? She gave me a knowing look.
I mean powerful people who believed in keeping their word, no matter the cost.
The way she said it made something cold unfurl in my chest. I glanced at the books scattered around her desk. Some were historical texts, others ledgers, names, transactions, records of old dealings. One of them was open to a page detailing a Sicilian artifact linked to sworn brotherhoods. I tapped the page. "Tell me about this." She hesitated, then sighed.
The Ring of San Michele, a centuries-old artifact said to have been used in secret ceremonies. Those who wore it were bound to an unbreakable vow.
I leaned in. And where is it now?
No one knows, but there are rumors. Some say it was lost in a fire. Others claim it was smuggled out of Sicily centuries ago.
I studied her face. There was something else she wasn't telling me. You're interested in this ring for a reason, aren't you? Isabella tilted her head, watching me as if calculating how much to reveal.
History is full of lost promises, detective. Sometimes they come back in ways we don't expect.
Her voice was smooth, but there was something behind it, a challenge. I'd met women like Isabella before, women who played with secrets the way others played with fire. The problem was, I had a habit of getting burned. That night, a private library. We met again under different circumstances. Isabella had agreed to help me dig deeper into the meaning of the note, and that meant access to private records, records that weren't meant to be seen. The library belonged to an old friend of hers, a collector of Sicilian history. We moved through the narrow aisles, the scent of aged paper and polish was heavy in the air.
These ledgers contain records of secret dealings between noble families.
She whispered as she pulled out an old, leather-bound book.
If this vow is linked to one of them, we might find a name.
We flipped through the pages, searching for anything that matched the phrase from the note. Then suddenly,
"Stop looking."
the voice was low, edged with quiet menace. We turned. A man in a dark suit stood near the entrance, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. His hand rested inside his jacket, where a gun might be. He wasn't alone. A second figure loomed near the exit, blocking our only escape. Isabella's breath hitched.
We've been followed.
I stepped forward, my stance easy, but my mind racing. If you're here to threaten us, you should know I don't scare easily. The man smirked.
"This isn't a threat, Signore Mori. It's a warning."
He pulled something from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. A small, folded letter. It was addressed to Isabella. She opened it with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words, and her face went pale. I took the note from her hands and read the message. "Turn back now, or you'll never get the chance again." The meaning was clear. We weren't just chasing history anymore. We were in the middle of something much bigger, and whoever was behind it was ready to make sure we never found the truth. Mafia echoes unveiled. The moment we stepped out of the private library, I knew we weren't alone. The warning in the letter was clear enough. Turn back now, but I wasn't the type to back down. And neither, it seemed, was Dr. Isabella Moretti. She walked beside me, her arms wrapped around herself, her mind clearly somewhere else.
Whoever sent that letter knew exactly where to find me.
And that means they know what we're looking for. We reached my car, and I pulled open the door for her. You should lay low for a few days. She shot me a glare.
You think I scare that easily?
I smirked despite myself. No, but I think people who underestimate threats don't live long. She hesitated.
And what about you, Detective? You plan on ignoring the warning.
I got behind the wheel and started the engine. I plan on finding out why they're so desperate to stop us. A visit from the past. The next morning, I got an unexpected visitor. I was in my office, poring over old Sicilian records, when the door swung open without a knock. Salvatore Greco, a man I hadn't seen in years. He was older now, his once dark hair streaked with gray, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled. He was dressed in an immaculate navy suit, the kind that men of his stature wore. I leaned back in my chair. Salvatore, to what do I owe the pleasure? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes.
You've been asking questions, Francesco, about things better left buried.
I didn't answer. I just watched him in waiting. He sighed.
You think because you left, because you built yourself a different life, that certain people will forget who you are.
He leaned forward, lowering his voice.
But blood is blood, ragazzo, and certain debts are never erased.
A slow heat built in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Is that why you're here? To remind me of my last name? His smile returned, this time colder.
No, I'm here to tell you to walk away.
I exhaled through my nose. And if I don't? He stood, adjusting his cuffs.
Then you'll be forced to make a choice, one that you won't like.
I watched him leave, the weight of his words settling around me like chains. This wasn't just about an old vow or a stolen artifact anymore. This was about my family, my past, and someone wanted me to pick a side. The infiltration. If I wanted answers, I had to move fast, through an old informant. I learned that the Ring of San Michel wasn't just a legend, it was real. And in 2 nights, it was set to be auctioned off at an exclusive private event, a gathering for the kind of men who dealt in power, not money. I needed an invitation, or I needed to steal one. That's how Isabella and I found ourselves outside the Palazzo Bellini, an extravagant estate that catered to the elite. Inside, the city's most powerful figures were gathering. Dressed in a sleek black suit, I adjusted my cufflinks and glanced at Isabella. She was stunning in an emerald green gown, her dark hair swept to the side.
Remind me why I let you drag me into this?
I smirked, because you're as stubborn as I am, and because we need to know who's behind this. We stepped into the main hall, blending into the sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey filled the air. Men who ran the city were here tonight, and among them, someone knew the truth about the ring. I moved through the crowd, my senses sharp, scanning faces. Isabella drifted toward a group of scholars discussing antiquities, her cover story. Then I spotted him, Alessandro Vitali, a name that meant power in Sicily, and more importantly, a man who had once been very close to my father. I approached carefully, my voice smooth. Signore Vitali, it's been a long time. He turned, and for a brief moment, I saw a surprise flicker in his gaze before it vanished behind a mask of indifference.
Francesco Mori.
He swirled the amber liquid in his glass.
I thought you'd left this world behind.
I smiled. It has a way of pulling me back in. His eyes darkened.
You should be careful, Ragazzo. Some doors, once reopened, can never be closed.
I held his gaze. And some men once crossed don't forgive easily. A tense silence. Then, slowly, Vitali chuckled.
Still your father's son, I see.
I didn't answer, but we both knew what he meant. Then, from across the room, I saw Isabella stiffen. She was talking to an older man, his voice low and urgent, and then he slipped something into her hand before disappearing into the crowd. I moved to her side. What was that? She opened her palm, revealing a small, folded note. Inside, only 2 words. They know. We weren't just being watched. We were running out of time. The betrayer's gambit. The words on the note sat heavy in my mind. They know. Whoever had written it had risked their own safety to get it to Isabella. And that meant one thing. We had already gone too deep, but there was no turning back now. The Grand Gala. The auction was set to begin in less than an hour. A sea of powerful figures, cloaked in wealth and secrecy, gathered in Palazzo Bellini's ballroom. Gilded chandeliers cast a golden glow over polished marble floors. This wasn't just an auction. It was a meeting of those who rule from the shadows. And at the center of it all was a prize that had pulled me into the storm. The Ring of San Michel, the ancient artifact, said to be tied to blood oaths and unbreakable vows, sat displayed in a glass case at the far end of the room, a piece of Sicilian history that someone was willing to kill for. I felt Isabella at my side, her voice barely a whisper.
If the ring is here, then so is whoever orchestrated all of this.
I scanned the room, looking for familiar faces. Vitali was here. Greco was here. And so were men whose fortunes had been built on whispers and buried secrets. One of them had sent a note. One of them had tried to warn us. And one of them was about to make sure neither of us left this place alive. Unmasking the mastermind, the auction began, each item more extravagant than the last. Fine art, smuggled jewels, and finally,
our next piece, a truly rare artifact, the legendary Ring of San Michel.
A hush fell over the room. The opening bid was announced, numbers rising rapidly as men in tailored suits signaled their interest. I kept my eyes on Alessandro Vitali. He hadn't moved, hadn't lifted a hand, but there was something in his expression, something too satisfied. And then it clicked. This wasn't just an auction. This was a setup. I leaned toward Isabella. We need to move. Now. Too late. The door slammed shut behind us. The security guards, who weren't just guards, locked the exits. The room went deathly silent as a slow, deliberate clap echoed through space. Vitali stood from his seat, his smile razor-sharp.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some unexpected guests tonight.
His gaze settled on me.
Francesco Mori, always in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The crowd shifted, and I realized and most of them weren't surprised, because most of them were in on it. Vitali gestured toward the display.
That ring is more than an artifact. It is a symbol, a reminder of oaths that were sworn and oaths that were broken.
His eyes gleamed.
A reminder that blood debts must always be paid.
I felt Isabella tense beside me. This wasn't about history. This was about me. Vitali took a step forward, his voice smooth.
Your father made a choice, Francesco. A choice to turn his back on the old ways. And yet here you are, chasing ghosts.
I kept my stance relaxed, but my pulse thrummed. I don't chase ghosts, Vitali. I chase criminals. His smile widened.
But in Sicily, sometimes those are the same thing.
He snapped his fingers, and the first shot rang out. The escape. I moved fast, pulling Isabella behind a column as chaos erupted. The guards, Vitali's men, drew their weapons. Guests screamed, rushing for the exits that had been sealed shut. The ring was still in its case. Forgotten in frenzy, I grabbed Isabella's hand. We need to get to that case. She didn't argue. We moved through the panicked crowd, keeping low as bullets shattered glass and ricocheted off marble. I took out one of the guards near the stairwell with a quick strike to the throat. His gun clattered to the floor, and I took it. Another guard spotted us and raised his weapon. I fired first. We reached the case. Isabella worked fast, overriding the electronic lock with the precision of someone who knew her way around artifacts.
Got it.
She gasped. The glass hissed as the case unlocked. She grabbed the ring, small, unassuming, but heavier than it looked. Then from behind us,
Not so fast.
Vitali, holding a gun, aimed directly at Isabella. The final choice.
Hand it over,
His voice was eerily calm.
or she dies.
I clenched my jaw. You don't need the ring, Vitali. You need what it represents. He smirked.
And that's exactly why I can't let you take it.
My grip tightened on my own weapon. But before I could make a move, Isabella did. With a swift motion, she threw the ring into the air. Vitali's eyes flicked upward. A second of distraction. That was all I needed. I fired. The bullet hit its mark. Vitali staggered back, eyes wide with shock. His gun slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. I caught the ring before it hit the ground. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then around us, the guests who hadn't already fled began slipping away, eager to distance themselves from a losing battle. The old world had tried to reclaim me tonight, but I had burned it down instead. A new beginning. Or another mystery. We left Palazzo Bellini just before dawn, the ring safely in our possession. Isabella looked at me, exhausted but victorious.
You realize that this isn't over.
I turned the ring over my fingers. No, but it's a start. She watched me for a moment, then smirked.
You're going to keep chasing ghosts, aren't you?
I smiled. Not ghosts, just the truth. And then, as if the night wasn't finished with us yet, my phone buzzed. A new message. No number, no name, just a single line of text.
There is another vow you haven't uncovered yet.
I exhaled slowly. The past wasn't done with me, and something told me it never would be